Jack Benny constructed the most well-known vault in radio history in 1945. There were only sound effects and quips about being frugal. It was all pretend. Jack, however, also possessed a real vault. One that, 50 years after his passing, remains sealed. Audio reels with the label "Do Not Open" were inside. Upon playing them at last, researchers heard Jack's voice admitting to things that might have ended his career. His true reasons for leaving vaudeville and the reality about what transpired during those years of missing battle are revealed in the recordings. Although his mother had already made that decision months before, he was born Benjamin Kubilski on February 14, 1894. Emma Saxes flew all the way to Chicago to give birth there, even though she was pregnant in Waukegan. She thought her son's future as a world-class violinist would benefit from having a birth certificate from a big city. She had no desire for her son to come from a little town. She hoped he would be a significant figure. She had a keen mind but a weak body. And she was already certain that her kid would grow up performing for crowded concert halls on the violin. Meyer, his father, had a different kind of tale about music. Originally from Poland, he began his career as a street vendor in Chicago before gradually rising to the position of saloon owner. He didn't think much of show business and believed that any decent Jewish family would be foolish to pursue it. But in that marriage, Emma's voice was more powerful. She began molding Benjamin as soon as he could grasp an instrument. By the time he turned 3, they had relocated to a little home on South G Street and resumed walking. Benjamin had an issue because he could view Lake Michigan from their front window. Even though he was meant to be practicing his violin music for 2 hours every day, he kept his eyes on the lake. While Emma continued to promote the music, Meyer continued to operate his tavern and eventually opened a haberdashery. Although Benjamin became a protective big brother after Florence was born in 1900, he continued to spend his days playing the violin. Lessons with Professor Harlow, who charged 50 music cents twice a week, started as soon as he received a half-size violin as a gift on his 6th birthday that year. Benjamin performed well. He was so talented that he was dubbed a prodigy. He frequently traveled to Chicago to attend the musical college and learn with Hugo Kortschak. However, he detested practicing. As he hardly touched his bow, his mother sat at the piano and narrated, "You can do it better." The residents of Waukegan had such faith in him that they organized a fund to send him to study in Europe. He declined the offer, shocking everyone. Already he was sliding away from that route. He was failing every class he was in. He committed pranks on music. He didn't attend class. The most famous one occurred during the winter when he smeared Limburger cheese behind the radiator in the classroom. The entire school was forced to close when it melted. After being expelled in his first year, the principal said he might return if he changed, but he never did. Benjamin had already secured a position as a violinist in the Barrison Theater's pit orchestra by that point. He was performing for live shows while his classmates studied arithmetic. His father's tavern was the source of his true education. It was packed with boisterous personalities and touring entertainers. It taught him what made music laugh and what didn't. When the Marx Boys arrived in town one evening in 1911, their mother, Minnie, watched Benjamin, then a child, play. His parents turned down her offer to tour with music, them for $7.50 a week, accommodation and board included. It would corrupt him, they claimed. They slammed the door shut, but it might have changed his life. Benjamin, who was 17 at the time, made a significant choice that year. He left school permanently and joined 43-year-old widow Cora Salisbury in a vaudeville show. In order to protect him from stage door females and negative influences, she assured his parents. They performed in dusty venues throughout the Midwest, traveling nonstop and sometimes 4 shows a day. Benjamin's weekly salary was $7.50, and their show was called From Grand Opera to Ragtime. It was only the beginning, but it wasn't much. Then, everything almost fell apart in 1912. Due of their similar names, Jen Kubelik, the well-known violinist, sent attorneys threatening to sue him. Benjamin changed his stage name to Benny because he was so scared. It didn't, however, resolve the issue. Ben Burney, another performer, followed him a few years later. This gave rise to the moniker Jack Benny, which was inspired by a fortunate supper with comedian Benny Rubin as well as by fellow sailors calling each other Jack. The term had stuck by 1921. In 1914, Jack partnered with pianist Lyman Woods when Ka quit the act to take care of her mother. By 1916, their show was bringing in $350 to $400 a week, which was a significant sum for the period. Music, they combined serious music with comedic timing and funny music faces while performing in upscale theaters from Boston to San Francisco. However, when they performed at the Palace Theater in New York in 1917, everything fell wrong. They blew it, and it was the largest vaudeville stage. The crowd was uninterested in their act, which followed an animal routine. After the relationship dissolved, Jack joined the Navy. During World War I, Jack, at 23 years old, was drafted and sent to the Great Lakes Naval Training Center. He initially performed the violin at festivals and ceremonies, but one night was a game-changer. The audience began jeering when he played the rosary during a talent show. Pat O'Brien, a fellow sailor, yelled at him to crack a joke. Jack said something so brief that everyone in the room, music, burst out laughing. That was the occasion. The comic was born at that point. Playing the awkward role of Izzy, he started doing frequent appearances in the Great Lakes Review. He entertained audiences of up to 5,000 sailors. He learned about timing. Music, he found charisma. He also found that a single joke might garner more applause than an hour of music. That was the character he maintained when the war ended in 1918. America still had to deal with food rations and was exhausted and broke. Thus, Jack Benny adopted the frugal, penny-pinching attitude he had cultivated while serving in the Navy. He began a solo performance called Fiddle Funology, which combined jokes about being cheap with violin playing. He laughed at himself. From his coat, he extracted counterfeit currency. It was adored by audiences. There was no better time to do it. Because they could relate to it, people laughed. No, he wasn't making fun of them. He was among them. Music made considerably more money after he and Lyman Woods returned to the VA circuit. They booked second build sites across the nation and reimagined their performance, combining stand-up with music. They performed in various cities and prestigious Chicago theaters. The castle in New York, however, had already passed, and he was still haunted by that failure. But Jack persisted. The violin was trimmed by him. He made the jokes more witty. He gradually transformed into something new after receiving a name that was truly his. A man who could stand in front of thousands of people, scarcely move his face, music, deliver one sentence, and leave everyone bent over, not a side act or a poor musician. Jack Benny had been traveling for more than 10 years and was over 30 when he finally made it to Broadway in 1924. This was unusual, even though he was no stranger to the stage. There was more to Benny's antics than just another vaudeville show. Finally, he had the opportunity to try something new. He held his violin as he stood in the brilliant light. He wasn't attempting to impress anyone with his talent this time, though. Even though he had begun playing music at the age of 6 and had the ability to perform flawlessly, he purposefully played just enough poorly to make others laugh. Broadway had not yet witnessed that combination of caustic sarcasm, a little song, and a great deal of confidence. The New York Times described it as novel. And he had eventually decided on Jack Benny after tossing around names like Benjamin Kobilski and Ben K. Benny for years. It was effective and stuck. He took a chance in a show named The Great Temptations in 1926, 2 years later. Music, it was audacious, edgy, and even somewhat scandalous. Once more, he performed as a witty violinist, but he began, music, ad-libbing. 5-minute sketches were extended to 15 minutes. The crowds adored it. Neither did the producers. Benny didn't care that they pleaded with him to follow the script so that the show would run on time. He made use of his creative control granted by his contract. The backstage arguments were so heated that the corporation threatened to fire him. However, he continued. He was unable. Perhaps that's when Broadway began to recognize that Jack Benny was different from the rest. He was doing more than a show. He had been rewriting the rules. Something, music, unexpected occurred the same year. Sadie Marks was met by Jack. It wasn't their first meeting, technically. When Jack was about 30 years old in 1919 or 1920, Zippo Marks had asked him to a family Passover dinner in Vancouver. Sudie, a 14-year-old girl, was present and utterly frightened. In an attempt to win him over, she performed a piece on the violin. Not even to listen, he left. To help him slip out, he requested Zippo. He was heard. And when he performed at the Orium Theatre the following evening, she and her pals sat in the first row and looked straight ahead. Not even a giggle or a smile. She was retaliated upon. Not until 1925 or 1926, when she was 20 and selling lingerie at Music, the May firm in downtown Los Angeles, did they cross paths again. When Jack arrived, she broke the store record by purchasing so much women's hosiery. Every day he returned. Music, when he was on tour, he called her all the time. This was not a fleeting affair. It was slow, clunky, and strange, yet it managed to work somehow. Jack Benny was cast in the lead of Artists and Models in 1927. His career on Broadway peaked at this point. He made $1,500 a week, or almost $25,000 in today's currency. There was more to it than just money. Music, it was approval. It clicked what he was doing. He would enter the stage, set up a lovely classical piece, then deliberately ruin it with terrible violin playing. The crowd roared. He employed well-timed sarcasm, prolonged pauses, and pretend annoyance. The intelligent people in the audience were aware of his true talent, but he preferred laughter, music, over applause. His own failure became an artistic endeavor. And the music was effective. In the same year that Jack was making people laugh, he was also hit with a song that almost ended his career. He was accused of underpaying orchestra musicians by a theater manager. All of a sudden, the rumors weren't about talent or humor. Money was at the center of them. The union of musicians became engaged. Blacklisting threats were present. His performances began to be recognized by theater owners. It was awful. Jack had to apologize and pay compensation, music, in order to continue working. But the harm persisted. Whispers began to circulate that Jack Benny was cheap and would stiff musicians in order to save money. And no one remembered him when he adopted the cheapskate persona on the radio years later. It wasn't merely a gesture. It had a genuine scandal at its core. However, it wasn't all bad that year. Jack married Sudie, who is now known as Mary Livingstone, Music, at the Clayton Hotel in Waukegan, Illinois, on January 14, 1927. When Jack was about to stomp the glass during the ceremony, an unexpected event occurred. Jack did not pass out. Mary was it. Right in front of everyone, she passed out. But she discovered roses when she awoke. Already, Jack had begun sending her a single red rose each day. She thought they would cease after the wedding. They weren't. Until his death in 1974, he continued to send her a single red rose every single day. 48 years old. Every day, one rose. They took in a 2-week-old child called Joan in 1934. How can you want to adopt a funnel-looking thing like that one? Jack asked, glancing at her, but she was taken home. By then, Jack had already been persuaded to pursue a career in radio by Mary. It was the end of vaudeville. It was hard to tour. Radio represented stability in music. She was correct. They prospered. The wedding cost $25,000 when Joan married at the age of 19. The dress she wore was created in France. Holland shipped flowers. The Beverly Hills Hotel was the venue for the reception. It was among the most extravagant weddings Music had ever witnessed in Hollywood. With the Canada Dry program in 1932, Jack made his radio debut. By the end of the week, 40 million people were listening to it, which had started on May 2nd. But initially, it didn't make sense. Jack continued to attempt to blend humor with music. Taking his violin seriously, he hoped to impress the audience. It wasn't. They received poor evaluations. It didn't matter. Then something clicked. He gave up attempting to impress. He deliberately ruined the violin. People made fun of him because he let it. He created the joke for himself. Suddenly, it was adored by the audience. In 1933, he transferred to CBS Music. He was 39, but he simply froze the number rather than growing older. He was always 39 from that point on. He claimed that turning 40 was not amusing. He unveiled the absurd underground stronghold known as the Vault Gag that year, complete with booby traps, security sirens, and even a guard who had been imprisoned there since the Civil War. That was ridiculous. It was successful and had theatrical music. People trusted that vault as if it were real. The cast began to take shape by 1936. Don Wilson entered with a loud voice. Phil Harris arrived with his southern charm, calling Jack Jackson and using a single line or two to steal music scenes. Then came Rochester's Eddie Anderson. He had a regular role on national radio, making him the first black man to do so. He was more than just Jack's servant on the show. He was outwitted. He was the last to speak. Every time he talked, walls were broken. And Jack wouldn't perform without music, him when Southern stations attempted to prohibit episodes that featured Rochester. Jack Benny dominated radio from 1937 to 1945. He consistently had a show in the top 3. He agreed to a deal paying $25,000 per week in 1944. In today's currency, that amounts to nearly $400,000. His annual salary was around $3 million. The man who made jokes about being frugal wasn't always that way, though. 10% of his radio revenues were donated to war bonds during World War II. With the USO, he performed for more than 3 million troops over 32,000 meters. He didn't only tour the vault. Music, made those who were in dire need of humor laugh. The vault officially opened on January 7, 1945. Doors creaked and the alarm went off. Ed, the guard, was standing by. There was only sound as the entire event unfolded in people's imaginations. The joke turned into something more. It served as a representation. Ronald Colman was a guest on the program in 1946. Leo DeRosa also did. The vault turned into a clubhouse for celebrities and the wealthy. Fans urged Jack to open the vault for charity and letters, despite the fact that it was a work of fiction. Since it was a part of something larger, they had faith in it. Security was the issue. The goal was to save. It was about laughing through hardship. Music. By 1948, Jack had made the vault a Christmas custom. He gave Don Wilson a gift on December 19, music, but later changed his mind and gave it back in one of the most watched Christmas specials ever, while concealing the actual math in the vault. The familiarity of the bit made it work. It made frugal music humorous rather than cruel. Additionally, many continued to watch Jack Benny squeeze pennies even after the war ended and their spending increased. And the IRS wasn't laughing in real music life. Jack claimed only $19 in entertainment costs despite earning $375,000 annually. In a particular occasion, he forced Gloria Stewart and Jimmy Stewart to pay for his dinner, then demanded payment for dry music, cleaning his suit when she spilled salad on him. However, he chose to present the audits rather than avoid them. He included them into the humor. In 1929, Jack Benny believed he had finally succeeded. He had been cast in the 2-hour musical, A Hollywood Review of 1929, which included nearly all of MGM's stars. In addition to making $1 million, the movie received a Best Picture nomination. However, Benny gave a stiff, awkward, and wooden performance. His performance on the violin sounded phony. His timing wasn't perfect. His agent had lobbied for him to sign a 5-year contract with MGM. However, they quietly dropped him after his next movie, Chasing Rainbows, failed. He returned to Broadway in a few months, humiliated. It wasn't just a failure for that first movie part. It affected how he was perceived. He began to be perceived by studios as anxious, uncertain, and difficult to cast. He carried that one slip-up in 1929 with him for years. He was given another chance in 1935 with Broadway Melody of 1936, a high-profile movie that required $1 million to produce. Benny began ad-libbing phrases that actually enhanced the script while playing a rival Broadway producer. However, Roy Del Ruth, his director, detested it. He insisted that Benny follow the script exactly. Crew members recalled hours of yelling confrontations because they disagreed so frequently. Timing has to be, music, organic, in Benny's opinion. Del Ruth believed he was merely being challenging. Despite the movie earning about 2.9 million copies and receiving a nomination for Best Picture, Benny left with a reputation as a person that directors didn't want to collaborate with. The label from his first movie adhered to it nearly as well. And then 1937. While on vacation with Mary Livingstone in Cannes, Jack encountered a man posing as Albert Chapo, who said he was an ambassador from Nicaragua. Using his diplomatic immunity, he promised to smuggle $200 worth of jewels for Mary past customs. He had Benny's trust. He was unaware that Nathan Shapiro was the man's true name and that he was a con artist who had previously served time in Leavenworth. The fraud fell apart on August 30th, when Benny returned to New York. The jewelry was concealed on Chapo. He uttered anti-Nazi comments, which led his maid, Rosa Bear, to turn him in. In 1939, Jack found himself in front of Judge Vincent L. Leal, who sentenced him to a suspended one-year prison term and a $10,000 fine. Benny could hardly say, "I do." George Burns also became entangled in it when the court said, "You must feel very much ashamed of yourself." For his wife Gracie, he had purchased a $4.85 diamond bracelet from Chapo to cover up the burn scars from her early years. The fine for Burns, music, was $8,000. His total came to $17,770 after legal fees. Instead of allowing their jobs to fail, both guys managed to turn them into comedic endeavors. On their radio programs, they made jokes about their criminal histories and costly errors. Burns even made light of the need to report to a probation officer. The general populace adored it. Music, sponsors didn't abandon them. Indeed, they were extremely popular. The government gave $6.14 to Rosebur, the maid who revealed the fraud. Jack never gave up on making films successful. He portrayed an angel who was given the order to destroy Earth in the 1945 fantasy film The Horn Blows at Midnight. It had cost Warner Brothers $1.8 million, but the timing was disastrous. 8 days prior to the movie's premiere, President Franklin D. Roosevelt passed away. Everyone in the country was in grief. The last thing everyone desired was a comedy about the end of the world. Only $970,000 was earned by the movie, while music lost $861,000. It was criticized for being overdone and useless. Jack, however, did not flee the catastrophe. For the next 20 years, he used it as a recurring joke in his shows. The movie disaster became more well-known than it could have been as a success thanks to his self-deprecating humor. In 1950, Benny gave television a try for the first time. His It Music CBS premiere took place on October 28, with just 4 shows scheduled for the initial season. His radio contract was still in effect, and he was unsure about how he would appear on screen at 56. He even made a joke about ending his own life if the show didn't work out in his first speech. However, it succeeded. The thing blew up. 20 million viewers per week were in place by 1952. Millions were paid in sponsorship by Lucky Strike. When the show started airing every week in 1960, Benny rose to prominence on television. He tried new things on that platform. Future President Ronald Reagan made an appearance in a vault sketch in 1954. Benny was the first to incorporate visitors into a running plot, which was uncommon at the time. He accepted young comedians as well. Keep improving. It won't be long before you'll have your picture on TV Guide. Benny Carson never forgot the comment when he appeared on November 20, 1955. He took on the comedy, timing, and facial expressions of Benny. He then became the music industry's longest-running late-night host. Jack Benny continued to perform throughout the 1960s. His 1964 to 1965 last season on NBC took the vault music skits to the next level, transforming them into parody of the Cold War. There were flamethrowers, alligator mows, and even guard plants called Irving in the Vault. These jokes included comments on America's fixation on security. Musician Carson continued to visit the set. They became closer as Benny taught them all the skills he had acquired. The Smothers Brothers' refusal to adopt his technique at the end of the concert on April 16, 1965, caused genuine tension on the air. NBC paid more to show the conclusion of something significant, because they knew it would be a historic event. Benny didn't disappear after he retired. He chatted with the Times for his guest appearances. He hosted a program featuring Bob Hope and the Beach Boys in 1965. He discussed thrift during the Vietnam War using his vault gags. For one-night performances, CBS Music gave him a lot of money. He was one of America's highest-paid comedians, even in his 70s. Beneath all the laughs, though, was something he never discussed. He marketed Lucky Strike cigarettes between 1950 and 1964. He marketed the stuff he would die for 15 years. He canceled a show in October 1974 due to vertigo. Physicians found he had pancreatic cancer in December. It was unusable. Music was all he had for weeks. Up until the very end, he continued to film. At the age of 80, Jack Benny passed away on December 26, 1974. Frank Sinatra, Bob Hope, Johnny Carson, and George Burns were among his last guests. Then an unforeseen event took place. His $5,052,000 fortune, valued at $35 million today, was revealed when his will was made public. He has a $46,000 rare 1729 Stradivarius violin. In 1985, his Beverly Hills estate, which was located across from the Playboy Mansion, sold for $3 million. For decades, the man who was perceived as being inexpensive had been covertly giving. He established $39 trust funds for each newborn born in the city on October 5, 1961, the day his hometown renamed a junior high in his honor. Quietly, he made contributions to charitable funds, youth programs, orchestras, and music. His generosity had been a facade. Jack Benny, the actual one, gave without telling anyone. He irrevocably altered humor. Gary Shandling, Jerry Seinfeld, and Larry David all adopted his style. A show about nothing. A self-playing personality. Awkward pauses, running gags, and ensemble casts. Jack was the first to do everything. He blended fiction and reality in his presentation. Broke the fourth wall and shown that humor could be nuanced, slow, and witty. His 63-year career is represented by his 3 Walk of Fame stars, 1 for film, 1 for radio, and 1 for television. Following his passing, letters surfaced that revealed additional information. In private, he had backed civil rights initiatives. His faithful TV companion, Rochester, was able to support Eddie Anderson's family. Anderson was named one of the 100 richest African Americans by Ebony magazine in 1962. Anderson's house became the Rochester House, a shelter and rehabilitation facility, after his death in 1977. Together, their 3 films from 1940 to 1941 demonstrated that, despite music, Hollywood's insistence to the contrary, black actors could attract sizable Southern audiences. In 2025, an odd development has occurred. The Radio Vault podcast series Lost Episodes is digitizing and releasing ancient radio scripts by Jack Benny. Jokes from the time of the war that were too edgy. His episode from January 7, 1945, aired once more. For the first time, music, people are still hearing his vault open. He still has good timing. Music, the gags remain funny. And as we learn more, the guy behind the myth becomes more apparent.